And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday, March 25th, 2017 edition of Auto Talk. I am your host, Ed Welsh, and for the rest of this hour, we'll be discussing matters that are of pertinence to you and your automobile. As always, we hope to impart to you some useful automotive information and perhaps provoke some automotive conversation on this foggy Saturday morning in the Mohawk Valley. And, of course, that leads us right to today's car care tip, and that's talking about fog and how much of a disaster could actually be looming on our foggy roadways. It's kind of the highway version of the blind man's bluff. Remember that game when you were a kid? But, you know, this is the time of the year when you have warmer, wet air mixing with the cold ground. Today you've got all the snow on the ground, so that really leads to a lot of what's called fog, and we know what that is. And, of course, it may be preferable to snow or sleet, but it also brings some unique challenges for us when we're driving around. You know, when the weather makes for fog, make it very fog-prone, we'll just say, you know, we got to be thinking about how to cope with things at a moment's notice. Because, you know what happens? You can go from having good visibility to patchy visibility to thick cover in almost an instant, depending on where you're driving. And, of course, you know, fog can also catch you by surprise because it hangs in low-lying areas. You know, 1 minute you're driving along a clear road with the view. Next minute your visibility drops to 200 feet. And you're still going at the same speed. It also affects your perceptual judgments for speed and distance. In other words, you lose a lot in the contrast and making objects appear fainter and less distant than they really are. And that's a problem with fog, especially in the mornings. So driving in the fog is like driving with a blindfold on, if you think about it, because you really can't see very well. Now, when we look at fog-related accidents, most safety experts actually talk about fog accidents occurring because people are driving too fast on an obscured roadway. It's kind of like if you had no lights on at night, driving at night, how fast would you drive? And what makes it more difficult is, as I said before, you know, in 1 minute you've got visibility, the next minute you don't. Now, one of the things we do is kind of habitual as you know, drivers. If we're in a heavy fog, and this also goes for heavy snow, if we're driving down the road, we tend to follow the taillights of the vehicle that's ahead of us. And that's where some experts refer to the blind leading the blind in this regard. Because obviously, if you find yourself driving in foggy conditions, the best thing you could do is, first of all, pull over if it's too foggy, and, you know, service center, safe place. If that isn't possible, what you want to do is slow down gradually and drive at the speed that suits the conditions. Another mistake that we make in many cases when it comes to fog is using our high beams. We should use your low beams. The high beams reflect off the moisture droplets in the fog, making it harder to see. Now, if you've got fog lights on your car, use them. And use them addition with your low beams. That's what I like to do. Because what happens is they're lower, so they'll kind of shine under the blanket of fog for the most part, and you'll be able to see a little bit better. But, you know, they can be useful if correctly used, but depending how bright they are, just like high beams, they can blind oncoming traffic in non-foggy conditions. So when you talk about using your fog lights, what's the good rule? Well, I'd like to think about using them when visibility is less than 100 yards. Now, obviously, when you're driving in a fog, it's nerve-wracking. So a couple of points, obviously, is, number one, you want to minimize your distractions. You know, don't be singing along with the music, and don't be talking on the cell phone. Don't be rolling down the windows. You know, in other words, 2 hands on the wheel and focus on the road. You want to keep your eye on your speedometer. A lot of the studies we looked at shows that some drivers acclimate themselves to foggy conditions and unconsciously increase their speed over time. Again, that leads to some of the issues we talked about earlier. So you want to make sure you're staying, you know, probably a good 10 miles an hour below the speed limit. And, of course, you want to make sure that when there is a vehicle in front of you, you're keeping as much distance as you can. You know, the normal rule of 1 car per 10 miles an hour, you know, you should double or triple that when driving in the fog, at least double it. And, of course, you know, you don't want to be using the taillights from the other car as the only guide because, hey, that person drives off the road and you're following their taillights, you might go with them. A few other simple things, obviously, you want to make sure you use proper lane discipline. Don't be passing, changing lanes, crossing traffic. Use pavement markings as a guide to help you, but what you want to do, and what I like to do, is use the right edge of the road as a guide rather than the center line. If the cars are coming the other way, I don't want to be too close to the center line in the fog in case they're drifting over a little bit. You want to stay as far to the right as you can and use the shoulder of the road or the shoulder marking at the right edge of the road as a guideline. We talked about increasing your distance, but you also remember that the reason you're doing that is so you have more room to brake or if something happens to the car in front of you. Also remember that moisture can build up on the inside of the windshield as well as the outside, so use defroster. And if it's warm enough, you want to use your air conditioner, believe it or not, to keep the moisture from building up inside. The air conditioner, when it's turned on, really acts as a dehumidifier more than anything else. So you could probably set it at the highest air conditioning temperature and put it on if you're noticing moisture inside the car. So in other words, 65, 66, 67 degrees, and then basically turn the AC on for a little while, and that'll recirculate the air inside the car and really do a good job removing the moisture. And as I said before, if the fog becomes too dense, pull over. There's no reason to put yourself in danger. It'll clear eventually. Fogs tend to lift. They don't stay forever. Really, once the temperature starts to change outside, the fog will generally lift. But a day like today, because of the snow cover, you're going to have that cold ground with that warm air, and boy, you're going to get a lot of fog. And we're probably going to see a few more mornings like this for quite a while, considering the snow cover that's still around out there, although it's melting pretty quick. But so be on your toes today. Fog's better now than it was 2 hours ago, but be careful getting out there this morning. And remember that there's disaster can be looming on a foggy roadway, so watch what you're doing out there. Folks, it's 14 minutes past the hour. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about improving the New York State seatbelt law. Probably some things going on about that you may not be aware of, but we're going to talk about that when we come back. I'm Ed Welsh. You're listening to Auto Talk on your News Talk and Sports leader, WIBX 950 and WIBX950.com.